Hi, it's Thursday night. The NBA trade deadline is officially over. And welcome to another episode of Heat Check Podcast. I'm John Devine. This is Anthony Chang. A very tired Anthony Chang because he's had a busy little bit of time. So we're going to get right into it. Let's start first off. Jimmy Butler is no longer a member of the Miami Heat. He is one of the places. Originally, he said he wanted to go. And then he said he only wanted to go to Phoenix, and even said he would not sign an extension with them. But he ended up in Golden State with the 2-year extension for a lot of money. So break down who ended up officially going where.
Yeah, Jimmy Butler got what he wanted. He ended up going to Golden State, which, like you said, was one of his preferred destinations at the start of this. He got his max extension, 2 years, $111 million, I believe. Which is the extension he wanted from the Heat initially before all this kind of unraveled here in Miami. So the Warriors got Jimmy. The Heat, in return, gets Andrew Wiggins, a 29-year-old, very good two-way player who's going to fit in nicely. Kyle Anderson, a vet, who I think was initially supposed to go to Toronto. That fell through. Ends up with the Heat. They also got Davion Mitchell. Going to be a nice depth piece for them at guard, a good point of attack defender. From Toronto, and a top 10 protected 2025 first round pick from Golden State. That 2025 is supposed to be a really good draft. So now, that pick will likely convey, assuming Golden State makes the playoffs. So the Heat, while their pick they won't have their pick most likely, they will likely have at least that pick in this draft that's going to be very good. So they get into this draft, they add some pieces that help them this season, and they rid themselves of the headache that was Jimmy Butler.
Okay, so
and of course, there's other. Sorry, before that, there's other layers to this. There's also the Raptors getting
right.
PJ Tucker, second round pick from the Heat, cash from the Heat. The Pistons get Lindy Waters, Dennis Schroeder, a second round pick from the Warriors, and the Jazz get KJ Martin and a second round pick from the Pistons, and they get Josh Richardson, another second round pick from the Heat. So basically, the Heat give away Jimmy, Josh Richardson, 2 second round picks. And they got that return.
Gotcha. Well, you answered my next question for me. So, sorry, Josh. I know PJ Tucker technically was here, and he hadn't played in 2 years. Had a couple quotes. Maybe I'm ready to play. Then he got shipped over to north of the border. So let's see if he'll be ready to play. I mean, I'm glad that they got, Mitchell instead of PJ Tucker because PJ Tucker's 39.
Yep.
He moves like a glacier or an iceberg at this point. It's not his fault. I was 39 once. Everybody moves like that at 39. But yeah, I mean, it's good for the Heat to get a point guard who can play defense on the ball. I don't think that's a strong point for them right now. So at least they have one person that's good. So what do you think this does for the team? What does it do from a financial standpoint for the team? Because let's not overlook that. That's kind of huge.
Yeah, it is. And let me get the exact numbers because, as everyone knows, it's very complicated. So bear with me here. Basically, they shed enough money to get under the first apron, which is big. They are now $2 million under the first apron, which means by being under the first apron, they can sign any player in the buyout market. So there'll be players in the buyout market. Now, they currently have 15 players on their standard contract, which is the max. So in order to add somebody, they'll have to waive somebody, right? So we have to mention that. But they will be eligible to sign any player in the buyout market. There should be a lot of players in the buyout market this year based on all the trades that happened here in the last few days. Seems like there'll be a lot of buyout candidates. If they were above the first apron, like they were before the trade, they would have been limited to signing only players waived that had a pre-waiver salary of less than $12.8 million. So basically no big names, because if they made more than $12.8 million before they were waived, the Heat wouldn't be able to sign them. Now they can sign anybody. So that's number one. They also lower their tax bill, which I know maybe fans don't care about this, but it is a business at the end of the day, the bottom line, right? It was $23.8 million before the trade. Big tax bill for a 500 team. And now it is about $4 million. So you basically saved $20 million on this trade. It would have been nice for the Heat. I think they were trying to do this to get under the tax completely, because then not only do not pay a tax, but also all the non-tax teams get all the tax money that the tax teams pay, and they divvy it up around each other. So let's say they don't pay the bill, and they also get $15 million that goes to these non-tax. So, but they didn't get under the tax, so that won't happen. It also would have, they were in the tax last year. There's also this thing called the repeater tax, which is a very onerous tax that's higher than the usual luxury tax, and that's for teams that are in the tax in three times in a 4-year period. So right now they're on track, and I don't know how they can get out of the tax at this point because the trade deadline is over. They will be in the tax in back-to-back years. So all of a sudden that is a concern, the repeater tax, but we'll worry about that another day. But the main point is they're under the first apron, and they're able to be real players in the buyout market, and they slashed their luxury tax bill by $20 million.
So one of the things I understand is when they were over the second apron, and I know the trade deadline is over. But
they were over the first apron. They weren't over the second.
Okay, but they can only trade for even amount of salaries. Sure. So could they do aggregate salaries? So where they were able to add up to 52. Well, he was making 48, Jimmy Butler.
Yeah.
So on one side that was 48 million. The other side, you didn't have to have one person at 48. That was only because of Phoenix, right? That they had to do it because Phoenix was
over the second apron, so they could not combine salaries. The Heat were able to combine salaries, which they obviously did here by trading Josh and Jimmy. The only thing is the Heat couldn't take back more money than they had in a trade.
Okay.
And they sent out in a trade. But now, now it doesn't matter because the trade deadline is over.
Right.
But now technically they would be able to because they're under the first apron.
But if everything, I bring this up because if everything held true and we're in the off season or we're going into next year, this is something that's not going to change unless they change the collective bargaining agreement. So it's something to get familiar with because this has a bearing on what happens next season.
Yeah, and you see it. I mean, we got a clear view of why the Heat and most teams do not want to be above the second apron. Look at what happened to Phoenix. They wanted to make a move desperately. They tried everything to get Jimmy Butler. They just could not. Between being in the second apron where you can't combine salaries, you can't take back more money, and the fact that Beal had a no trade clause, they were locked in. And that's why the Heat has been adamant about not being over the second apron. It's not necessarily about saving money. It's just about being able to have some flexibility. And that's why they were adamant about not taking Bradley Beal's no trade clause, because now Phoenix was stuck with that, right? They couldn't do what they wanted. So we really got a glimpse at how punitive and how restrictive that second apron is.
So, turning back the clock about 24 hours ago, there was a brief moment where Heat fans were kind of giddy about the prospect of, hey, maybe Kevin Durant is actually going to come here a few years later than we expected, but people held out hope that was going to happen. Why do you think that was, and what do you think held it up?
Yeah, I think there were conversations, between Phoenix and Miami. Obviously, Miami has long had interest in Kevin Durant, right? That's kind of like the running joke of how many times will they pursue Kevin Durant without getting him. I think this is the third time. It was a short pursuit, right? I think it was a surprise that Kevin Durant was even available. And I think even it seems like reportedly Kevin Durant was surprised that he was in trade rumors heading into the deadline. But ESPN's Brian Windhorst reported this, and I've heard this as well. Phoenix was asking for a lot, and rightfully so. I mean, he's a future Hall of Famer. He's Kevin Durant. And I think the Heat just took the deal they thought was better. They didn't have to break up their young core. They didn't have to give up a pick. Instead, they got a pick. They kept their young core together. They kept their flexibility. So I think they just opted, Phoenix by asking for too much. He had this deal with Golden State lined up. They liked this one more, and they ended up picking this one.
Now, there was a rumor that he was rumored to – they were asking around in Golden State for him to come back, and he kind of put the kibosh on that pretty quick. I don't know what it is. I don't know if him and Draymond still don't get along or what it is, but he was like, no, I'm not going there. And I think that's part of the reason people said, well, maybe he can come to Miami if he's not going to go there. So, but, I guess there are fans who are always like, well, we're always in the mix, but we don't get to pull that trigger. Look, there are a lot of teams that aren't in the mix. I always mention Orlando just because I think that team's very interesting in terms of the talent they have. But you didn't hear a peep out of a team like Orlando. You didn't hear, no. You didn't hear much even about a team like Houston. Even there are winning teams that do not get in the conversation at all. So that does show the kind of respect and esteem he still has, that he can get in the door. Now, we just have to be able to close at some point. But, there's so many different things. It's not just whether, Pat Riley has the magnetism to bring these people home. There's more to it.
Yeah, I mean, look, they were in the room for Damian Lillard. Damian Lillard actually wanted to come here. This was his top destination. Bradley Beal wanted to come to the Heat, a couple years ago, and ended up going to Phoenix. Kevin Durant has had the Heat on his list like a couple times, right, in the past few years. Heat always seem to be in the conversation. For them now, it's about collecting enough assets to get those deals done. And yes, would I have liked to have seen the Heat get 2 picks out of this trade and just continue to stockpile assets? Yeah, but you get 1 more pick. Again, you keep your flexibility moving forward. You're building a really interesting young core that you could put together a good trade package if the right star becomes available and you want to cash in some of those young chips. So I think they're building toward having that type of package. So I think that was part of this trade, is setting yourself up for that kind of move. And look, next summer, we could be talking about another Kevin Durant pursuit. I would not be surprised, right? That's kind of the buzz around the NBA today. A lot of reporters have been saying that as well, where Kevin Durant wasn't too thrilled about being in trade talks. Next year is the final year of his current contract. So if he wants out, he could ask Phoenix to trade him, right? And the Heat have always been linked to Kevin Durant, so maybe they'll get it done this summer. We'll see. But I would not discount more Kevin Durant conversation in the coming months.
So a comment and then one question. This reminds me of the year before the Heat picked up Shaq, where they had guys like Lamar Odom. They had Brian Grant. They had Caron Butler. They had a lot of players that were attractive, but they were not quite the top flight stars. And when I say top flight stars, I'm talking like top 10 players. But that was enough to put together a package to lure one in. So that being said, did the Heat, you weigh the players they got, you weigh the financial flexibility. Did they get enough in this deal for Jimmy Butler, a disgruntled Jimmy Butler?
I think they did good. Was it like a grand slam? No, I think Kevin Durant obviously would have been like the home run. But I think it was a good deal, all things considered. When I spoke to different people around the Heat, what they wanted going into this was players that can help them this season, because the Heat, they always want to compete. They're never just gonna give up on a season. They want to get they want to get better from this trade, right? They didn't have Jimmy Butler. They pretty much didn't have Jimmy Butler this season. So what can we add that can help us? Andrew Wiggins, probably going to step in and be a starting small forward from day one, right? And he's going to help you on both ends. Davion Mitchell, we've talked about. Good depth piece who's going to help their point of attack defense on the perimeter, which they need. Even Kyle Anderson, solid player. Another good depth piece. So
you have yet to say where Kyle Anderson plays, by the way.
Position. Well, he's a wing. He's like a wing. Yeah. He's like a guard, forward, that you could long wingspan. Not obviously, I think his nickname is Slow Mo. So not very fast, but smart, cerebral player who's kind of versatile. So yeah, I mean, will he be in the rotation? I don't know. I guess we'll see. But obviously, Andrew Wiggins, I would expect, and Davion Mitchell, I think there's definitely a need for him, right? I don't know who will play over. I don't know if it'll be from day one, but there's definitely a need for a guy like Davion Mitchell and what he can give you. Yeah, I think all things considered, the fact that how bad this situation got, Jimmy didn't want to be here. Everyone knew that. You kind of had to get rid of him. The Heat said like, oh well, if we don't find a good deal, we'll bring him back. But everyone knew that wasn't the ideal outcome. The Heat wanted to trade him and kind of move past this situation. So, not only do you move past the situation, not have to deal with it for the rest of the year, hanging over the team, but also You add a guy who's going to start for you, who's 29 years old, and you get a draft pick in a very good draft. That's probably going to be 14th, 15th pick. Like, it's not going to be a bad pick. And you keep your flexibility, which is what the Heat wanted. They get contributors to keep your flexibility and to add draft capital. And they did that while preserving their kind of improving rapidly over the last few weeks young core. They didn't dismantle that young core, which is, I think, a positive too from this deal.
So in reading Barry Jackson, who was at the Philadelphia game last night, one, Kevin Love found out about the trade from a fan, which was hilarious. But in reading his story after the game, it seems like there was a weight lifted because there was some clarity in the situation. From what I read, and obviously I'm not in the locker room like you are, but from reading the Heat's responses, one, I was surprised there were responses from the Heat because they're very tight-lipped.
Yeah.
But, it didn't seem like they had any animosity towards Jimmy, but they knew this had to come to an end one way or the other. Well, especially this way. So at least they can all move on from here. So, there's something to be said for peace of mind.
Yeah, and I think they wanted some clarity because this whole back and forth of Jimmy suspended. Oh, he's coming back. Is he playing hard? What is he going to do if he doesn't start? Oh, he's suspended again. Oh, he missed a flight. He's coming back. Oh, he's suspended. If we're tired of it, right? Imagine them having to deal with that day in and day out while trying to win games. He's your best player. He was their best player. And when your best player doesn't want to be there, and it's constant in and out, and even when he's in there, he's not himself because he doesn't want to be there, and it's kind of awkward. And then you're having to answer questions every day. Whoa, what about if Jimmy comes back? How does that change things? And it's just it was, yes, they don't have animosity toward Jimmy, and I know guys like Nico, Kevin Love, like other guys, like they grew close to Jimmy. They're friends with Jimmy. I think they're happy for him that he ended up getting what he wanted. He ended up going to one of the teams he was interested in. He got his extension, but I also think the Heat are ready to move forward. And there's a new era now. They have some clarity on we're going young. Like, this is different. This is fresh. We've had 6 years of Jimmy, and now it's, we move on to a new chapter. So I think that's what we saw last night. I think we saw a relief of like, oh, we can breathe now. We know what we have moving forward. We don't have to keep answering questions about this until it's March 25 and they have to play Jimmy Butler. That'll be a different issue. When Golden State comes to Miami, that'll be, a big story. But for now, they're able to kind of unshackle themselves from the whole Jimmy Butler thing and just play basketball, which is all they want.
So let's try this. We have been talking for about 20 minutes about everything off the court. We have the players unless it's something with buyout or injury. We see this collection. I know Spo hasn't spoken yet. I know he hasn't gotten in the lab yet to cook up different lineups. But what do you see in terms of a rotation with the players that they now have, the 15 that are now on the roster? How do you see it working out early?
Yeah, I would expect Wiggins to start probably in place of Haywood Highsmith. So then you have a starting lineup of Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Andrew Wiggins, Bam Adebayo, and Khalil Ware. It's a good starting lineup, and then off the bench you have Terry Rozier. We'll see where Davion Mitchell fits. I would think they'll find a spot for him, even if it's 10 minutes a game, just because, again, I think they need that type of defense. And I think they will with these acquisitions. Andrew Wiggins, good defender, long, has length, a 7-foot wingspan, I believe. Davion Mitchell, good defender. You pair those two guys in lineups like with, let's say they can throw out, if they need to stop, a lineup of Ware, Bam, Wiggins, Davion Mitchell, and maybe Haywood Highsmith. That's a really good defensive lineup, right? Mm-hmm. And we've seen the Heat. They have not a good offensive team. They're 13-0 when they hold teams under 100 points or fewer. That's basically half their wins. They win with defense. So I really think after these trades, they get better on defense. I think they're really going to lead into defense. You're going to see a lot of games 99, 97. It's not going to be a great, high-scoring team. This is going to be an in-the-mud team. So I think they're going to lead into that. So I think Davion Mitchell will play. So and from there, we'll see what they do with the bench. But
you still haven't said Jovic yet.
Yeah, I think Jovic will be there. Jaquez. We'll see with Rozier and Mitchell what they do with those two, if they split the time, or maybe Mitchell gets a playing time, or Rozier gets a playing time. Um, and who am I forgetting? I'm forgetting one more. Top of my head.
Like Kevin Love? I don't know.
No, not Kevin Love, unless there's an injury to the bigs. Um, I mean, Pella played yesterday, right? But that
Right.
ninth spot is always kind of fluctuating, whether it's Alec Burks or Pella Larson. Maybe it is David Mitchell and Rozier and those and Jaquez and Jovic.
Right.
So, but yeah, I think definitely Wiggins. I would be surprised if he's not starting from the start. Oh, and also the one name I didn't mention was Haywood Highsmith. He
Yes.
could be the ninth guy, but considering how his minutes have been cut even while starting, now with Wiggins going to be in the mix, taking that starting spot most likely and playing probably 30 plus minutes, does Haywood lose a spot in the rotation? That is a possibility.
I guess it leads to the question, is there such a thing as too much depth? If you can't, we know Spo's going to move around and keep looking for the right combinations, the right plus minus. But as you keep looking for those things, is there's too much depth?
I don't think it's possible only because you've seen with injuries, right? All the injury issues that he'd have had in recent years. There's always something, right? And knock on wood, this team can stay pretty healthy, but it's a long season, a lot of back-to-backs, a lot of trips. They seem to be well equipped to handle injuries and not have too much of a drop off, unless it's obviously Bam or Tyler. That's hard to replace those guys on this team, but they have the depth now, where they're able to, and if a guy's out or Jovic is out or Duncan's out, they have the depth to be able to still win games. So they got deeper. I think they got clarity on their identity, which their identity has always been defense, but now they improved on that end. They added two of the league's top perimeter on-ball defenders in Wiggins and Mitchell. You add them to the mix again with like guys like Bam and Khalil and Haywood. They have some really good defensive options to turn to. So, is this a championship roster? No. Could they avoid the play-in? Sure. I mean, I think they could definitely end up being 6 or maybe even 5 if they get hot, and be a feisty team in the playoffs. So, I think it'll be a fun team to watch. It's something different, right? Young, feisty team that kind of going to watch grow up in front of our eyes, really. Kind of like you said, like those Caron Butler, Lamar Odom teams where kind of just surprised you and were fun to watch and fun to root for.
They have a lot of length, it looks like, when it comes to defense.
Which is funny, right? Because they've been a small team for so long. And now
and it's weird because I was like, when they first said PJ Tucker, I'm like, PJ Tucker. Then I'm like, well, I guess there could be room for him because, that rugged kind of defender. And they don't, well, I guess Kevin Love can kind of qualify as someone who can push him around. They do have more size than they've ever had. And I was like, do they have enough size? But it's more than they've ever had. And it's mobile. The size they have is mobile. I mean, Nico isn't exactly fleet of foot, but, he has enough length where I saw last night and he actually blocked a shot in the fourth quarter. And I was like, well, that's a surprise.
6'10", 6'11". Yeah.
Right. So, yes. So I may want to quibble about do they have enough size, but it's more size that they've actually used than they've had in a long time.
Oh, there's no doubt. I mean, they can throw lineups out there with Ware, Bam, and Nico like we saw once so far this season, but that's an option. And even Wiggins, Bam, and Khalil is pretty big. Again, Wiggins is a 7-foot wingspan. He has length. He plays big. So, yeah, they definitely have functional size, functional positional size that, they could play big against teams like Orlando like they did a few weeks ago. They could play smaller if they wanted to with like Tyler Hero and Davon Mitchell in the backcourt. But they have some depth and they have some versatility, which I think Eric Spoelstra always likes. We know it. I mean, we always mention it, right? He likes to tinker around with lineups. He likes to tinker around based on matchups. And he has different combinations he could turn to now based on the need, the situation, or even the opponent.
Hey, and when you compare it to what flexibility he had at the beginning of the season, it is a step up. For everybody who's lamenting, oh, no, we didn't get this, we didn't get that.
Yeah.
If we look at game 1, and now we're looking into the All-Star break, there's more talent. There's more talent. There's more versatility on this team.
I will say this, like, the ceiling of this team obviously is higher with Jimmy on the roster because we've seen what he can do in the playoffs. We've seen what he can do when he's at the top of his game. He could be a top 10, even top 5 player in the NBA, right? When he's truly engaged and play, quote unquote playoff Jimmy. Is the ceiling that high with this roster? No, I don't think the ceiling is as high. But is it crazy to say that maybe they could be a better regular season team with this roster? I don't think that's crazy considering they've basically been a 500 team for the past 2.5 years, right? So I do think with guys like Wiggins and Mitchell, who are going to be available most nights, we're going to get most nights, they could be a team that is very, good, like good to, I would say at least above average in the regular season, that will produce at least similar results to what you got with Jimmy in the regular season. But the difference is in the playoffs, the ceiling just won't be as high because you're not going to have a guy like Jimmy who could just turn into Michael Jordan like he did 2 or 3 years ago in the playoffs.
And you just mentioned a key thing, Michael Jordan 2 or 3 years ago.
Yeah.
Playoff Jimmy we're talking about is 33, 32-year-old playoff Jimmy. Jimmy's 35. If we looked at some of the stats early on, we were talking about like his percentage of finishing inside of certain distances, like inside of 10 feet went down last year. Not this year. The numbers this year, let's be honest, they're totally skewed because he didn't want to be here. So the effort, waxed and waned. But looking at last year, those numbers started, finishing was a problem.
Right. It was.
Is it because he didn't have quite the same lift because time catches up to all of us? I can't really say. But I do know that at some point, unless your name's LeBron James, there's a lifespan of how many jumps you have in your legs, how much time you have. And that time, the sands were starting to run out for him. It happens to everybody. They are younger. They don't have a playoff Jimmy. But you may have 2 or 3 guys who, as they're exposed, just like we're going younger now, if all of a sudden, and you actually get Tyler Hero healthy in the playoffs, you don't necessarily know how. You've seen in the bubble that he kind of went off, and that was as a rookie. He's older. Bam gets to play forward instead of center, gets to open up, gets to play against smaller guys, hunt matchups. You have guys, you have shooters now spread out that, and we know the offense still isn't great, but you have a couple of shooters here and there. You have a slasher, and if I'm not mistaken, Wiggins is a better three-point shooter than Jimmy was. So, and if we're going back 2 or 3 years ago, Golden State's last title, Andrew Wiggins was like one of the best guys on the floor that.
He was. He was an all-star that year, by the way.
Yes, and he was really, really good.
Yeah.
Will he ever be worthy of a number 1 pick? Probably not.
Probably not. But he's
darn good.
Very good NBA player and a two-way player, which we've talked about. Like they need more two-way players, right?
Yep.
Andrew Wiggins is a very good two-way player who's going to help this team. Again, is he Jimmy Butler? No. But he's a 29-year-old player who, honestly, like everybody gets better in the Heat system, right? Pretty much. So what can they get out of Wiggins? I know Wiggins has already been, had a career year a few years ago, like you said. But in this role around Bam, Jimmy, it'll be interesting to see how he fits and how he can help and how his game kind of continues to grow. Even though he is 29, I'm sure the Heat will unlock some different things there. And he is shooting 38%, to your point, on threes, on 6 threes a game. So that's solid. That's a pretty good volume.
More threes per game, too, because
more threes.
He can shoot them.
Exactly. And he's athletic. Again, he can defend. So really, I'm really, obviously, he's the big name that the Heat are getting in this trade. Really intrigued to see his fit and how Eric Spoelstra uses him, and just how he can play off and help Bam and Tyler, because I think that they've needed a guy who could put pressure on the paint, right? In that starting lineup. And Haywood Highsmith has been fine this year, but he's not that type of guy. He's a floor spacer. He cuts on the baseline, but he's not a guy you're going to give it to and he's going to put pressure in the paint. Andrew Wiggins can do that. So it adds another element that you were missing while Jimmy was out.
So I'm going to go on a limb here and say most of the people who are listening or watching to this podcast really care about the product on the floor. So I venture to say, unless you have tickets for March 25th, the Heat they won't be as interesting off the court, but you may have a more interesting product on the court because we don't know what we're going to get. I mean, we didn't know what we were going to get all year because Jimmy could go off at any minute. But now we don't know how this is going to fit. We don't know. Does Nico make another step? Does this all of a sudden open up more shooting for Duncan Robinson? We're still intrigued by Kel'el Ware and Bam Adebayo, playing as bigs. Can Tyler Hero continue to evolve? Is he going to be, the offensively? We understand Bam is the torchbearer of Heat culture, but I'm talking about like on there, who's going to get you a bucket? At this point, it's Tyler Hero. Can he continue to evolve? And let's be honest, they're also bringing more attention. If we remember last year, when they beat Boston for that one playoff game, after that, Boston turned all its attention on cutting off Tyler Hero. And he struggled a little bit. He's probably going to get more of that attention than he's ever as this season continues to go on. Can he beat that? These are all things that are going to be interesting. Yeah. And that's what I mean by so you guys who are listening and watching, you've got something to watch because you don't know what you're going to get.
Yeah, even guys like Jaime Jaquez, right? What is Jaime going to do with Jimmy now, the clarity of Jimmy not being there, right? Is he going to be used more in that Jimmy Butler role when he's in the game? You mentioned Kel'el Ware, 20 years old. We've seen his skill set as a 7-footer who can space the floor and block shots. We've seen Bam Adebayo play better lately, like you said, in that forward role. And by the way, again, if they keep the pick and Golden State makes the playoffs, they're probably going to be able to add another quality piece to this young core in this very good draft at pick number 14, 15, 16. So you got another young piece. They do
well with that. Look, Tyler Hero was what, 14th pick?
14, I think Bam was 13, I believe, or vice versa. It might be Bam was 14. Yeah.
Kel'el Ware was 15. Yeah. They don't do badly picking in that range. So
Nico was 27. I think Jaime was 18. So yeah, they usually hit on guys. And again, this would be a talented draft class. So I think the positive thing is it seems like they've picked a direction, which I've been wanting this team to do now for a few years. It seems like they were going on two separate timelines of trying to win now with Jimmy, but also trying to develop this young core. And you're kind of in between different builds. Now we kind of have some clarity. I keep using the word clarity of this is the direction we're going in. We're going to build around this group, develop this group for now, obviously, until maybe a star becomes available. You develop this group enough that you have enough assets on the roster that teams are interested in, and maybe you've stockpiled enough picks that you could deal, that you're in position to not only get in the game for a star, but to actually acquire the star. So I like the fact that they've kind of moved in one direction here.
And if you get a star, they still have enough players to put around them after that. Right. It's not like back in the day, like when the Lakers got Shaq, they got rid of everybody and they just hoped that they could fill it in. Yeah. And even when the Big Three was here, they had to fill it with minimum salaried players. I mean, they got players to play, whose names were bigger than that. But from a financial standpoint, they had to go shopping. So, they are in a better situation to go whale hunting, as Pat calls it. And, maybe Pat can get, that one final whale before, he rides off into the sunset. Or maybe he just keeps fighting and we have him around for a little bit longer. But final question before we wrap up, and that is, how is Jimmy's Heat legacy going to be viewed? And do you see any reconciliation ever? Is Pat going to be 90 and we try and put 22 in the rafters? Or are they going to say, or we're going to have to wait till, Pat has a funeral because it's over my dead body? Or how's this going to work? Or is it ever going to work?
Yeah, I don't know. I want to say time heals all, but this got really ugly. And I just am not sure. I think we said this last episode too. If I had to guess right now, I don't think his number is retired just because it got that bad, which is crazy because he is one of the, top 5 players in franchise history. But I will say this, whether he gets his number retired or not, he deserves a lot of credit for what he did in Miami. And I don't think people should forget that just because it ended in messy and it got ugly. He was probably the 3rd best player in Heat history when you consider what he accomplished on the court and leading a team to 2 finals. He has a bunch of the Heat's playoff records. He has the highest scoring playoff game in Heat history. He's among the franchise leaders in a bunch of different categories. So he exceeded all expectations, I think, with the Heat from when he first got here. So I will say that, like, I think he deserves a lot of credit. I think people should remember all the good times he created here, a lot of great memories, the bubble when we were all going through the COVID and the pandemic. Those are some really fun times. So we were able to kind of get away from difficult days and enjoy some basketball and his performances in the bubble. And in 2023, when he led that team to the finals against Denver, he just did a lot of good things, and it's a shame it ended the way it did. But I don't think what he did and all the the greatness he had here should be forgotten.
So we're talking 3 Eastern Conference Finals.
Yeah.
2 NBA Finals. And if there's an enduring snapshot of the whole thing, I don't know if you remember this. I think it was in the bubble.
Bending over and
bending over, just exhausted. You could see his given every single ounce of sweat that he had, and he was just exhausted. And I'm sure there are fans who remember that, just like there are fans who are going to remember this ugly breakup. But it was a very successful period. I rank this period, it reminds me of just as hard charging a team as those Zoe Tim Hardaway teams that didn't quite make it either, but they pushed so hard and they worked so hard.
Yeah.
And, the big 3 era is one thing, even Wade and Shaq is one thing, but if you have those others, there are teams and franchises that don't get a 5-year period like the one we just enjoyed. So we got to give the man credit for what was done. Wish him well. You can cheer March 25th, boo him March 25th, but you're going to get a reaction out of it March 25th. So if you have your tickets, enjoy them. We are going to see, that's about it for this episode. We are going to see how this new look Heat team goes. Let's wait and see how what Spo has to say, what he's going to cook up for lineups. We'll analyze that. We'll see what the team looks like. We'll see if it has better defense. We'll see if it has better offense, which is going to be something too. Are we going to get those, 99, 95 games? They're going to try and open up a little and find out that they don't have enough to do that because they can't shoot enough. We're going to find out. And that's what makes this interesting. And that's why you should come back and join us next week on an episode of Heat Check. Again, my name is John Devine. This is Anthony Chang. He will be there. Barry Jackson will be there. Those guys are on top of it. Give them a listen. Give them a read. Look on X. Look on MiamiHerald.com. Wherever you get your news, we are there. And thank you. This is for this episode. And until next time, you guys have a good day.